This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Kia ora, you're listening to Reserved Recommendations. Once again, this is a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. And I am joined by Derrick Sims, a returning champion. How's it going, Derrick? How's things?
Oh man, life is good.
Good. How's lockdown been treating you?
Oh, I loved it.
Good.
No, got a lot of things checked off the list, and with my students that I teach film at UCOL, we took that time to watch a lot of movies together and have conversations about them, and I actually think that's what made you bring me on to here, because we were watching Jacques Tati.
Well, that is exactly what happened, because you do regular, like, here's what I'm watching posts on Facebook, which is,
nightly.
I think that's quite a good way of using social media, actually, because it sets up more interesting discussions than the kind you often get. And you said you were watching, I think, Mon Oncle by Jacques Tati, and I really want to talk to someone about Tati, so you are the person that I have gone, you should come and do this. So for people who aren't at all familiar with him, Jacques Tati is a French filmmaker, was a French filmmaker. He died, I think, in 1984, something like that. He sort of bridged between silent movies and talkies in some ways.
Not historically, right? And so he came way after talkies began, but his actual movies may as well be silent films.
That's right, because he was working in talkies, but he was hugely influenced by silent stars like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and people like that. But he has this. So most of his movies are comedies. This is the first thing to say, and he has a very specific kind of style of physical comedy and this sort of stock character that he developed called Monsieur Hulot, who is, amongst other things, kind of part of the inspiration for Mr. Bean. Apparently,
definitely, yeah. So if you're a fan of Mr. Bean,
you
should give Tati a try.
You should give Tati a try.
It's a little different flavor, but it's in the same vein as.
Well, that's right. I mean, different flavor is a really good way of putting it, because the reservation that I would have about recommending Tati to people is that it's
a strong flavor.
It's a very strong. Well, it's a style of comedy which is really unique, and I really enjoy it. But it's very different from anything that's currently happening in modern comedy. You tend not to have, like, jokes per se. You
hardly ever have dialogue, and the dialogue that's there a lot of times doesn't matter.
No,
yeah,
that's right. I was saying before we started recording, I got given the Criterion, or I got sent the Criterion collection of Tati's filmography, like a box set of DVDs to review, and I watched a few of them with my kids, and so this is this is kids who are not super great at reading watching subtitled French movies, and the ones that they didn't engage with all of them, but the ones that they engaged with, the dialogue's completely irrelevant, as you say.
They understand it. Much like Mr. Bean, that's why he's such a huge international star. Rowan Atkinson, I've seen heaps of interviews of him. He goes anywhere on the planet, and everyone knows who he is, even though they don't speak the same language, verbal language at least. And that's why that show was such a big hit around the world, is because it didn't have the language barriers. It's just pure, and comedy is a bit, especially that kind. I don't like the term slapstick and I don't think that applies actually to Tati. Not always, or even Mr. Bean all the time, but I guess that's kind of a general term for that sort of thing. But that does speak to everyone, no matter what language you actually.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that it's not slapstick, and it's not slapstick in the sense that it's not comedy that revolves around like things happening to people. Often, like some of the early Hulot films have some of that. There's Mr. Hulot's Vacation, where there's jokes about like him paddling out in a boat and then the boat folding up around and sinking. But a lot of the humor in that character is about him being he's a very large man, and he doesn't ever really fit into any situation. Like he's always too big and his limbs are too long and they don't work right. And so the joke's not that bad things happen to him, it's that he's very strange and awkward.
Yeah. And I think Mon Oncle does a really good job of separating him, because I think it's his sister in the movie, and she's so uptight, and her husband is too, and they have that very modern looking house, which maybe we'll get into this in a minute, but the set designs and the production design, the set dressing in his movies is just phenomenal. And I think if you're a fan of Wes Anderson, you have Tati to thank for that, because Wes Anderson's obviously a massive fan of him. But yeah, the kind of a fish out of water type thing. Literally, there's actually a fish in that film that lives in their front yard. But he is so gangly and strange and awkward inside of their environment. Even the chairs that he sits in are different than the chairs they sit in. Toward the end of the movie, there's a couch, and you didn't realize that couch was in the background the whole time. It just kind of fits in with their modernist furniture. But now that you see it and he's laying on it, it's like, what is that? And then after, do you know what I'm talking about? Do you remember this? And he gets off the couch and they flip it over, like, oh, that was the couch that was in the background. He's using this, modern piece of furniture for other reasons. But anyway, that whole fish out of water in that film is even more obvious than, say, Mr. Hulot's Holiday or Traffic or something like that. He's so that the point of that movie is that I am very different than the rest of these people, and the uncle's the fun one. Hey, come play with me, and everyone else is so uptight, and
Yeah, and I mean there are kind of stock themes that Tati comes back to over and over again, and one of his kind of hobby horses is this idea that modern labor-saving technology is anything but, and my uncle is 100% about that. It's everything in this hyper-modernist house is woefully impractical. All the furniture is incredibly uncomfortable. They can't walk on their front path. It's constructed out of these stones, and they have to hop from place to place.
And walk in weird, like snake, to stay on the footpath. They have to kind of wind around the yard. And I love that Hulot is just like, now I just walk across, and step on everything.
It's interesting that you brought out how kind of meticulous that movie is in terms of set design, because one of the things that came in the boxed set was this documentary about Tati. And one of the little segments in that is they had this guy who's a sound designer. And so there's a sequence in Mon Oncle where he's in their hyper-modern kitchen and he's trying to make things work and he can't, and he drops some container or another and it's unbreakable, so it bounces back and it makes this really specific kind of ponk noise. And the sound designer deconstructs that from the soundtrack. And there's like, I don't know, it's something ridiculous like 6 or 7 audio layers to get precisely the kind of ponk that he was after. And that's working with tape. That's Tati himself sitting there with 7 little fragments of tape, layering them to make that.
And syncing them up so that they all hit at the same moment. Yeah, that gag is actually in Mr. Bean. That's in the Christmas Mr. Bean when he goes into Harrods or something like that, and he's got ball ornaments for the Christmas tree, and he takes the plastic one and he kind of shakes it and he drops it on the ground and it bonks up, and then he reaches up and grabs the glass one and drops it and it goes, and Mr. Bean's like, oh, I'll take the plastic one, because Hulot does that. He drops that whatever it is, it's like this ball thing, and it bounces, and then he grabs a glass and throws it down. I mean, literally, even the framing of the shot is exactly the same in Mr. Bean. So Yeah, that's great. And great little, I think anyone watching Mr. Bean who's a fan of Tati would be like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think if you went to Rowan Atkinson and said, hey, that Christmas ball bit, you were deliberately doing my uncle there, he would be like, yeah, absolutely. No, exactly. Yeah. That's that's obviously.
Right. But about that sound thing, did you know that Mon Uncle, they spent over a year in editing that movie, and it's a very deceptively basic. It's not really basic. It's quite complex, but it's not a fast-paced or fast-cut movie. There are lots of long shots, and stuff like that. But it took them over a year to do post-production, and more than half of that time was sound, because, like you said, it's pretty much silent. But those sound effects, he uses really unique sounds for all these little gags and stuff, and man, it's pretty complex,
Yeah. You were talking about Wes Anderson. The other thought that I had watching Mon Oncle is Mr. Hulot's house that he lives in. Mm-hmm. It's this weird, crazy kind of patched together building where he has to kind of walk in this weird zigzag path to get from his apartment to the ground floor. And that reminded me of... do you know Miyazaki Hayao from Studio Ghibli?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, his kind of obsession with weird crankum, like disintegrating buildings,
right?
Felt a lot like he'd seen that, that was the dot that I joined in my head there.
So that sequence you're talking about inside the house, I saw. Did you ever see Wes Anderson's The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou?
Yeah.
On the boat, they have kind of the cross section of the boat and how it just kind of follows him through the boat. Because when Hulot is going into his house, it's just a locked off shot, and you just see him going into all these little areas, and it's so hilarious. But it feels very much like, for me, because I saw Wes Anderson's movie first. But then I've also more recently gotten really into Buster Keaton and watching heaps and heaps of Buster Keaton stuff. And I'm trying to think of which film it is. I think it's The Cameraman, where Buster Keaton is going down the stairs, and it's like a cross section of stairs and completely flat kind of 2D camera, like looking directly at the wall, and he goes down the stairs, and then he goes down the hall, and then he goes down the stairs and goes down the hall and then down the stairs. I bet Jacques Tati got it from Buster Keaton, and then Wes Anderson got it from Jacques Tati, and they're all kind of feeding off of each other and creating their own unique visions. But that's what I got from it.
I could definitely see that. And I mean, so one of the things that I want to talk about that is one of my reservations recommending Tati to people if I didn't know their taste quite specifically is we're talking about this kind of locked off shot and watching things from some distance away, and that's like. He had this philosophy of he was never really like Hulot was a great character. It was a very popular character and a great character to kind of set situations rolling, but he wasn't ever happy with Hulot being the star of a movie. And so what you see as his career progresses, as he gets closer and closer to doing the thing that he absolutely wanted to do, which is a movie called Playtime, where he got total creative control and used it to blow himself up, basically. But is this kind of decentering of characters? His movies almost like start to turn into kind of like clockwork machines that you can watch like spinning and doing little flicky arms and things,
like automaton type stuff.
Yeah. And that's a very strange approach to filmmaking.
Well, you don't see it today.
No.
Not at all. You don't see anything like that today, really. Well, I think it's hard. I think it's really difficult, and that's why you don't see it. It's much easier to write a bunch of silly lines on a page or give two really funny actors or comedians a situation and then shoot multiple ways of them, kind of improvising inside that situation and create something funny in editing. Well, these guys aren't creating much at all in editing. It's all created there in front of the camera, and Rowan Atkinson's very vocal about how it's not really fun making his movies because he's so precise and so hard on himself and everyone else. I was watching the Johnny English series the last week or so, and there was a special feature on the last one, and he talked about how, I don't think a lot of people really enjoy working with me, and I hate that, but I also know that, we're trying to create something that's very unique, and not that Johnny English is like Jacques Tati anyway. But Rowan's work ethic and style is very much a lot of times in that vein, and it is a lot of hard work. And I think, because it is hard work, you don't see it very often these days.
Yeah, I think there's that, and I think also you could maybe thank, the age of the blockbuster and everyone discovering Campbell and going, we must have an arc where people learn things about themselves. And I mean, Mon Oncle is probably the most straightforwardly movie that he made. Maybe Traffic also.
Traffic's pretty absurd too.
Yeah, I mean it's absurd, but it makes sense in terms of telling a story from this that starts at the beginning and then has a middle and an end.
Yeah.
But Hulot doesn't really learn anything. I think his stuck-up sister and her family, they nearly learn something.
Maybe.
They don't really. The audience just watches them have all of this incredibly flash modern stuff and none of it works. And that's in contrast to his, completely ramshackle existence where he just has a good time all the time. Anything that you kind of get out of the movie in terms of, nothing's about the characters going on a journey, really. Well,
in a way, Mr. Bean's kind of the same. He never learns anything. He's the same character over and over again. It is more sort of hero-centric, I guess. Oh, I guess in the Mr. Bean movies, it's a bit more conventional, Mr. Bean's Holiday and whatnot. But the TV show, he never changes. He's the same thing over and over. Yeah, I think you're probably right about that, about the whole everyone, whether they actually studied Campbell or just saw the movies that came after him. But yeah, it's just kind of all kind of the same. Hero's journey. There has to be some sort of resolution in the end, and the protagonist is in some way different than he was in the beginning. And yeah, you don't get that at all in Tati's work. I'm looking up right now the Parade. Did you see Parade?
Yeah. So I mean, this is, I guess, we can talk about Parade in a second, and it's really interesting. Yeah. But the thing with Tati is that he started as essentially a vaudeville performer. So
mime, wasn't he a mime?
Yeah. He had this particular skill where he was really talented at embodying multiple parts of the same action at once. And so he would be miming riding a horse, and the top half of his body would be doing the rider, and the bottom half of his body would be doing the horse's legs. And he's got this real physical skill of being able to embody that stuff. Yeah. And Parade, the movie you're talking about, I think is his last or second last movie. Yeah, and it's a TV special for Denmark or something.
Oh, was it? I don't know. I've got it on DVD. That's the only way I've ever seen it. But that's probably one of the hardest ones of his to watch. I think all of his stuff, and I got this from my students whenever we were watching it. One in particular was talking about how, man, for the first hour, because it's 2 hour long comedy, right, with almost no dialogue. For the first hour, he was like, man, I just couldn't get into the movie, and I was kind of bored by it and stuff like that. But he said, but the last hour just flew by, and I thought it was hilarious. And I think maybe that's what it is. Maybe it takes an hour to kind of get used to him for a modern audience, And once you kind of settle in, okay, I see what I'm getting here, it's more digestible. I don't think that Parade's that way, though. No. I think it's a strange movie, and I tried watching it with my kids, and they watched it. But yeah, it's more of a just kind of an experimental circus type program, really.
Yeah, I mean, so my understanding of Parade is that it was made as a TV special, and he wasn't really thinking of it as his movie. It was just sort of this TV station wanted to do this special, and they went in collaboration with Jacques Tati because we've got access to him. Right. And so a lot of the stuff that he does in that movie is him reprising his old vaudeville stuff.
Right. The pre-Hulot stuff.
Yeah. A lot of that stuff.
So was Playtime his last movie? Was it his last movie before that? Do you know?
So what happened was that he built up all of this goodwill and financial backing making the Hulot movies. So that's Mr. Hulot's Vacation and Mon Oncle. And he got to do those because he made, what's it called? The movie about the postman. there's a movie about a postman trying to modernize his techniques in very rural France. It's called like School for Postmen or something like that.
Cours de soir.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
And he got the chance to make Playtime, which was like his magnum opus.
Right.
And Playtime is, he kind of deliberately takes a hammer to Hulot. Like he introduces himself as Hulot, and then he introduces a crowd of other people who look exactly like Hulot, and then Hulot kind of disappears from the movie for a while.
I love that moment when he's walking down into the, I think it's a subway, and he's got his little umbrella, and then everyone coming out of the subway looks exactly like him with the same umbrella, and he just gets lost among them. Yeah,
that's the one. So what he did there is he creates like the ultimate Tati kind of mechanical box movie where there's just this series of scenes where stuff happens and it's kind of him making a point and it's kind of funny, but there's no story. And often he had, I forget what it was, but it was like a new lens that meant that he could be further back than was previously possible. Like you could do longer shots than were feasible before. And so he made a lot of use of like, there's just a locked off shot of a corridor and someone starts at the very end of this incredibly long corridor and they take fully like 3 or 4 minutes to just walk towards you. And the joke is that this is a bad way to build a building. But you do just spend like 3 or 4 minutes watching this guy get very slowly closer to the camera. And not everyone was up for that kind of joke, unfortunately.
Well, and I think a modern audience finds it really hard to sit still and sit through that
exactly. And in the course of making Playtime, he built this enormous set called Hulotville. Tativille, which was the entire thing about Playtime is it's sort of the joke about how impractical the modern house is in Mon Oncle, but like expanded to an entire city. And he built the city with enormous concrete facades on tracks so you could push around bits and like build different streetscapes for different scenes. And his grand plan was that firstly, this movie was going to be an incredible success and everyone was going to see what a genius he was for finally having kind of boiled all of the personality-focused stuff out of comedy and just made it this perfect abstract engine. But also that the French government was then going to buy Tativille off him and it was going to be rented out to other filmmakers so that other people could make use of this like movable, changeable cityscape that he'd created. And the movie was a complete flop. And he spent I forget, I read it and it's gone out of my head, but he spent like the first year that it was in cinemas basically traveling around after the print, editing it on the fly, making it shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter.
He was known for that. He was actually known for a lot of times after the fact, re-editing his work over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so he did that, which of course cost yet more money. And he went completely broke, exhausted his own finances, exhausted his family's finances, like he called on his mother and his sister and burned all of their money on this project as well. And that left him in a position where he kind of had to take whatever job was going. And so Traffic, which is...
That came after that.
Yeah, that came after that. And that it's kind of a return to a more standard Hulot movie.
Right.
After he'd tried to kind of obliterate Hulot into a total anonymity. And then the final thing that he did was Playtime, which was Parade, which was, as I say, I think like a TV special rather than a movie. But both of those were made because essentially other people went, well, we've got some money, we want to make a thing. We've got access to Tati. He kind of has to take whatever job. Let's get him to do this thing. So they're like kind of less his in a lot of ways.
Well, it doesn't feel like his as much either as say the Hulot stuff. But I quite like Traffic. I like them all though. I like Playtime, and it's strangeness and unconvention. And that's part of the reason I like it. It's like, what the hell am I watching? This is so strange.
It's really good once you get on his wavelength. But
right.
It is kind of like someone explained the concept of comedy to space aliens, and then they thought that they were making a comedy movie that humans would like.
Some of us would like it, I guess. But you asked me, you said, I'd like you to talk about reserved recommendations. I'm like, I'm not reserved about recommending Tati to anybody. I don't expect them to like it, especially young people. So I think they have a hard time with it. But I found that I think they appreciated it more. Maybe it's because they're film students. They're just like, wow, this is, maybe I don't like it. Maybe I find it boring. But this is pretty difficult things, that are going on here that they're accomplishing. But yeah, in fact, I don't think I've ever met anyone who's a close personal friend of mine who likes him, at least not as much as I do.
Yeah, but, I think that's, I think Playtime is kind of the perfect example of that. There's a famous sequence at the end of Playtime where Hulot kind of re-emerges into the movie, having disappeared for a while, and he ends up at this flash nightclub, which is having its first night of operation, and everything goes wrong. He smashes the glass door on the way in by accident, and everything just gets worse from there.
I love the door gag.
Yeah, it's great. He smashes the door, and then he just stands there holding the door handle and moving it as though he's opening the door, and no one notices.
Someone else did that gag. I've seen it in another movie. And I can't remember what it is. Now's the first time thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. Where they're just holding that brass thing and just fake miming the door opening. And it's not just him; it's another character too.
Yeah, like I think he passes the door handle off to somebody else and gets them to take over for him or something. And then it kind of culminates in the nightclub being completely destroyed. Like just everything falls down, the roof panels fall off, everything gets smashed to pieces. And that was all practical. And they had to build and then tear this thing down. And it's done in this, like it looks wild when you're watching it, but it's incredibly meticulous.
Oh, yeah,
everything happens exactly at the right moment. Everything's constructed perfectly. And Tati's got this super long lens again, just right back so that you can see the entire thing happening all at once, and you have to kind of work out where you want to focus because there's no like depth of field, there's no narrowing in on anything.
Right. I like that about it though. It kind of lets the viewer almost tell their own story. It's like, oh, look up in that corner, and oh, look over here, and look at this thing that's going on down here. In Mon Oncle, when the people are upstairs, there's different things going on upstairs in that very modern house. There are different things going on downstairs. Then there's something going on in the yard off to the side, and it's just kind of like, take your pick. Where would you like to look at this? There's no narrative here. Just watch the silliness going on here and there, and whatnot. But I think he's probably the best. I was talking about Wes Anderson and sort of his sort of visual style, more his art direction, of like the sets and stuff like that, is very much like Tati. But unlike Mr. Bean and unlike Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and stuff like that, Tati has a different grasp on art direction and set design and stuff like that, and it's very, very complex stuff. And I think, you're talking about the nightclub and pretty much everything in Playtime, but a lot of his stuff, maybe not Mr. Hulot's Holiday, the earlier stuff, but later on in his career, everything is so it's built for the purpose of this scene, the houses and everything. It's not found in the real world. It's created based on his vision, and it's pretty wild, the stuff they create. But I'm trying to think of some of the other. Well, there's I bet the factory in Mon Oncle is actually real, the exterior. But everything always is so symmetrical always, and yeah, I just find it really fascinating. I think he really excels more than any of those other people. Really excels at that art direction and set design and things like that.
Yeah, I would. I guess a dot that you could join, and we will do that in just a moment because we are just about at the halfway break. But would be to someone like Kurosawa, just in the sense like everything that he puts on the screen is always. There's always a consideration of what shape it is and how it fits into the rectangular frame and what kind of a picture he's trying to create for you to look at, because it's never there's never anything that feels like an unconsidered shot.
And movement inside the frame of the different people. Well, in Playtime, there's scenes with lots and lots of people doing different things and stuff. And I'm thinking about the shot of all the cars, and kind of everyone's just walking with their umbrellas in between these cars and stuff like that. I mean, that is so complex. And Kurosawa was like that, even though his movies weren't in many ways like Jacques Tati. But man, his attention to movement, even in his later work, like I think it's in Ron, when you just got multiple planes of people moving deep in the background. There's some in the midground, there's some in the foreground, and they're making all these interesting shapes and stuff. It's really complex stuff, and I don't think you see that a lot today because it is so hard.
Yeah, no, it's incredible.
It takes a lot of time.
It's incredibly hard, and it's a very I guess you'd say like formal approach. Nothing about Playtime feels very informal. Like you never feel like you're just in a room watching people chatting. You always feel like you've been set up to look at this beautiful picture that's got fascinating things going on inside it.
You know what I think a lot of that is? I think it's the time in which they were made. Kurosawa was really thriving in the 50s and into the 60s. Tati's about the same, but there's more of an artifice in films before, like the French New Wave and all the New Wave movements, really. And they're not trying to capture reality. It's a theatricality almost. And I kind of miss that. Now we're so like, oh, that's not realistic at all. Well, it doesn't have to be. Movies aren't realistic, not at all. What we think is real is not real at all. That close-up of Leo, disappearing into the abyss in Titanic. Yeah, there's a crew of about 20 people standing right beside camera, and the camera's on a big gym. They're massive bright lights. Nothing about this is real. It is an artifice, but we try to create that illusion of real, and that's something that Tati didn't do and didn't care about, and that's one reason I really like him.
We will continue this conversation in just a second, but first we must take a brief break, and we will be back right after this.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
You're listening to Reserved Recommendations. This is a radio show and podcast about great trash and difficult art. And this is more on the difficult art end, although the difficult, as we've been saying, is more about you just kind of have to tune your brain to the frequency that the movie is on, and then you'll get it. It's a non-trivial effort, and you have to be prepared to put that energy in, but then it's very rewarding. I'm talking about the movies of Jacques Tati with Derrick Sims, returning champion here on the show. And we were just talking about, before the break, about I was kind of joining a dot to Kurosawa's movies because there is a similar kind of formalism and theatricality about them. And there's also, a willingness to make people just sit with the thing and deal with whatever it's telling you, and then you'll get there eventually. I guess if I wanted to kind of extend this metaphor, I would say, like, you could say Kurosawa did a thing to action movies that Tati does to comedies. Like Seven Samurai is a great action movie, but you have to watch like 45 odd minutes of a different movie about these two squabbling peasants like trying to recruit all of the samurai before you get to the bit that in a modern movie would be like the whole thing.
Well, it would open with that.
Yeah.
It would open with the action sequence, and that's James Bond. That's the James Bond formula that was created in the 60s and 70s, and then went on to every blockbuster. Indiana Jones always start off with the big action set piece, and then it cools down for a minute. Whereas Kurosawa was like, we're going to start with the cool stuff, and we're going to make you be patient for 45 minutes, and then you'll get a couple of sword fights and a couple of murders, and then we'll back off a little bit more.
Yeah, because that's exactly right. If you were to kind of graph the excitement per minute, James Bond in the modern blockbuster, there's a spike and then there's a drop. And if you graphed that for Seven Samurai, basically there's a little kind of bump at the start because it starts with the bandit raid and kind of setting up what the stakes are, but then it drops down again. and it just ramps very slowly up to the final grand confrontation and then drops back down again for the little reflective bit at the very end. And that's not a way that people do things. And
it's a shame, I think, because it teaches you impatience, the way things are done now. And it's gotten even worse. The James Bond thing, that begins in the 60s, which, by the way, in 1963, From Russia with Love came out. And do you know the James Bond series very well?
As a consequence of particular peculiarities of my upbringing, I have not watched a single James Bond film. I know kind of. Oh no, I tell a lie. I watched one of the Brosnan ones, and I think the first of the modern Daniel Craig ones. Okay. But I haven't watched any of the Connerys or Moores.
Well, this is the second Connery film. Came out a year after the first one. But there's a sequence in the beginning that most people remember where James Bond's going through this garden, quote-unquote James Bond. We come to find out it's not him. But sorry, and I'm kind of spoiling it because I'm showing this movie next week at the Cinematheque. But and I haven't watched it in many years, so I'm excited to see it. But everyone remembers this part. And I think it's Robert Shaw plays this bleach blonde character who has a the old classic watch that has the strangle line embedded in it. Anyway, and he chokes out James Bond. Come to find out, that was not the beginning of the movie. Cubby Broccoli, the producer, saw the original cut of the movie and he says, we need to start off with something exciting. And so they took that scene, which was meant to be later in the movie, shifted it to the beginning, and that was the beginning of the James Bond sort of action set piece starting off. So it was in the second film. And then it was such a big hit, that movie, that it continued on. And now it's become a thing. Like even in almost every movie, it starts off with this, especially blockbusters, start off with this big action set piece, then it cools down and begins the exposition, the traditional kind of narrative arc. But now I was saying it's teaches us impatience. Nowadays, it's in trailers. You go to YouTube or something and watch a trailer, they give you 5 seconds of a trailer that's like action-packed, and then it begins the trailer. Like, we can't even sit for 2 minutes now to watch a preview to a movie, a super condensed preview to a movie. We now have to give you 5 seconds, and I think part of that's because of the ad thing, the kind of skip ad stuff, tradition of online viewing. You got to get them in 5 seconds so that they will then sit for 90 seconds or whatever. And man, I think it's really unfortunate. I think it's really reprogramming brains to not be patient. And I think it makes it harder for younger people now to watch the Kurosawas and to watch the Tatis. And that's why I want students to watch these movies, because I want them to be accustomed to that sort of thing. And they can find it frustrating at first, but they slowly start to appreciate it, I find.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some tricks that you can do when you do that. I have two thoughts. The first is there are some tricks you can do when you do that kind of filmmaking that you can't do when you're trying to be much more kind of grab people much more immediately. I'm thinking about particularly, in horror, where the tradition of things being very slightly off and then very slowly escalating, or even movies where, maybe there isn't anything that's kind of overtly horrific, but the entire movie just manages to give you this kind of pervasive sense that everything is not right. Like you really have to have that kind of patience and that kind of confidence that your audience has that kind of patience.
Right. Which I've been less fortunate in my own career about expecting your audience. Just sit with me for a while. As if you can make it to 35 minutes without turning it off, it'll be worth it.
Yeah.
But they got to make it 35 minutes.
Yeah, they do. And so the other thought that I had was it reminded me of a thing, because I'm primarily a sound person. That's where I've done the most of my work. And there's a phenomenon in music recording called the Loudness War. Are you familiar with that?
Maybe. Continue on.
So basically, with the advent of first FM radio and then streaming services, people's exposure to music is much more ambient than it ever has been. Like the chance that you're just somewhere and there will be a song playing in the background constantly is higher than at any point in history. And because people are listening to music passively without having sought it out, often on highly subpar speaker environments, it's a little speaker in the roof of a supermarket or something, the chance of a song grabbing someone comes down to making like a really immediate sonic impact. And what that's meant is a lot of really heavy use of compression and limiting technology to make things sound louder without actually being loud enough to distort the, to break the medium that they're in.
So when you're looking at meters, is it actually louder in the readout? Or
What it is that there is less difference between the loud parts and the quiet parts.
Right, I see.
So if you go back to like the dawn of recording, what you'll find is that there's an enormous difference because there basically wasn't any such thing as compression or limiting, which are the technologies you would use to deal with that. And so if you like look at old blues recordings, the guitar's like burbling along at quite a low level and the guy sings and he's way louder than the guitar because that's the only way you can hear him over the guitar.
Right.
And then as you get further forward in time, you find that the difference between those things is less and less and less, and you start using more tricks like something that will automatically suppress all the other elements in the song when the voice comes in, and so you have that thing where you can hear things kind of dropping in and out like that. And the result of that has been that modern hyper-produced pop music can actually be quite difficult to listen to for any extended period because the effect of louderizing technologies as a class is to move things subjectively closer to your head when you hear them. So if you listen to them on headphones, suddenly everything is
there,
right next to your head, and it can be quite hard to deal with. And it also means that when you then go back to listening to older music, it kind of sounds a bit thin. And you have to kind of retune yourself to going, oh no, wait, this is just how things used to sound.
Right. Is that a big deal nowadays? I mean, how often are we subjected to that?
Well, I mean, it depends what kind of music you listen to.
What if you just listen to the radio, just pop music?
Yeah, if you're listening to
almost
just
everything.
Pop, yeah, probably.
Wow.
If you played blues from the 30s next to that, it would sound very strange and thin.
You put on your Robert Johnson, and also it's like, whoa, he's really loud.
Well, I mean, Robert Johnson's an interesting example, and we're getting deep in the weeds and off orthogonal to the point. But Robert Johnson's a really interesting example because he did a thing. People talked about how paranoid he was about people seeing his fingerings for chords and what he was playing, because he used to play just faced into a corner, so no one could see what he was doing when he was recording. But actually, acousticians have analysed what he was doing, and what he was doing was a primitive form of compression. He was doing a thing called corner loading, which is if you put a mic in the corner of the right angle corner of a room, then get close to it and play into that corner, then the reflections of coming off the walls makes everything tight and loud, and it's a precursor to the kind of stuff that people are doing, with very expensive electronics.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Well, there's a similar thing in the FCC in America, the government organization. I'm pretty sure they can still do this, but on television, people would up their audio levels, like actually, like in commercials and stuff like that, to try to grab attention. Especially in the days of television when it was in its prime. But you could get sued and would be fined by the FCC if you tried to do these sort of tactics to grab people's attention. So. I don't know if that's exactly part of that, but that was a big deal back in the day. Whenever I went to school, it was like, oh, this is what you have to mix at, and you have to keep it there because and you find it in at the cinema in Paiatua where we do our shows. Sometimes you get logos from. I don't mean to throw these guys under the bus, but Rialto is a distributor in New Zealand, and they have mixed their audio super high so that whenever a Rialto show comes on, it's like, oh, you have nothing else to, you can't ignore it. It's there. Wow, goodness, And I wonder if it's on purpose. I don't know. Maybe it's not. But,
I mean, it probably is. And I guess to come back to the point, all of these things are ways of trying to kind of hijack attention. And so it does mean that if you want to then engage with art that expects you to be more selective with your attention, that becomes more difficult. And it does mean that it's harder for someone to make a movie like Jacques Tati's or Kurosawa's these days.
And that's unfortunate, really. But I mean, it's not I don't think it's necessarily a new thing. I think even in his day, Tati was unique. I think the French probably liked him more than the rest of the world, just as an audience. But and while he had his fans elsewhere, if he would have been in the American studio system, I think we would have had a different Jacques Tati experience. Which would have been unfortunate. Luckily, he had that time and the people surrounding him and the money from, I don't know, was he getting his funding from the French government?
I believe he was, yeah. I believe he was getting stuff through arts grants and things. And I mean, it's interesting because we're talking a lot about kind of how he kind of sits outside of what was developing into the mainstream of modern cinema. But he's also a guy who was he went to the extent of building a city to shoot a movie in. His first kind of major success, The School for Postman, when that came out on the Criterion, that came out with two versions of the movie. There's a black and white version and there's a color version. And the reason for that is that he was using a new and entirely experimental color process to shoot the movie. And he shot it in black and white as a backup. And that's what was released to the world, because at the point at which he shot the movie in color, it was so advanced that there was no economical way to develop the film.
Print it. Wow.
And so
you know a lot about this. Are there really good special features on the Criterion stuff?
Yeah, if you can get the Criterion stuff.
Because mine are not the Criterion editions. They're whatever that was released in New Zealand, which are good editions, but they don't have all the juicy stuff that Criterion would have on it.
Yeah, no, it comes with a booklet that explains lots of stuff, and there's like a little mini documentary and things.
And so the color version's on there as well.
The color version's on there, and who we have to thank for that is his daughter, Sophie, I think, Tati's chef. She later, after his death, when the technology existed, worked out a way of creating a watchable print from the original version that he shot in color.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think we have a lot of famous daughters to thank for a lot of the stuff we enjoy today. And I mean that. Like, I'm thinking Hitchcock's daughter, Kubrick's daughter, Tati's daughter. A lot of them are I watched something just the other day, what was it? But it was a similar deal. The daughter kind of had the estate and had all this sort of stuff and wanted it to be preserved. And that's good, because I have a daughter, and she likes movies a lot. So hopefully one day she'll take the rest of whatever I've made or been making. She'll finish it out for me. I don't know. Maybe she'll go on to be much better than I am. But no, that's interesting. Do you know that about Kubrick's daughter?
Yeah, she published a lot of the behind the scenes footage and a lot of his letters and things.
Yeah. And Coppola too. Coppola's wife and I mean, he's still alive, but his wife has been a big help, and she documented a lot of stuff for him as well. Yeah,
Tati's daughter actually put together his very final thing, which is on the Criterion box as well, which is a short movie called Forza Bastia, which is, he was commissioned to shoot a film about this provincial soccer game. And then the game ended up getting rained off, and he got some way through putting it together when he died, basically, and his daughter got the footage and kind of his editing notes and put it the rest of the way together. And it's very interesting because if you imagine the Tati who made Playtime, here's my main character, now ignore him and look at this street full of people doing interesting things for half an hour. If you got that guy shooting a sports event, that's kind of what it's like.
Sounds great.
You see almost nothing of the soccer players.
Right.
It's just shots of the crowd and how they're feeling about the fact that the game's not started yet. And then he goes for a little wander around town. You see what the town's like. And the focus is completely, it's like the concept in like the Brazilian marching movement music. There's like the beat that you don't play. Everyone's got this beat in their head called the clave, and no one plays it, but everyone plays a reaction to it, so it's there in absence. And it's kind of like that. Like the soccer game is what informs everything you see, but you see nothing of it.
Does it feel like the rest of his work?
Yeah,
like based on those notes, the editing of those.
Yeah, it does kind of, because, I mean, no matter how you edited it, what you have is what he chose to get footage of, which is like everyone being excited about the game and then getting impatient when it doesn't happen, and like kids dressing up and stuff. And I think you see some people trying to like mop water off the pitch so it can start, but you never actually like see any soccer happen.
Wow. And when did that come out, and how long is it?
Oh, it's about half an hour, I think, and I think it came out in like the 90s or the aughts.
Oh, okay.
It's
wow.
Quite,
so
it's quite late.
New. Oh, yeah.
Wow. I think it's one of these things where the footage sat around for ages, and then she got a grant to put it together or something like that.
That's awesome. I think I mentioned to you that the Illusionist movie, which
yes,
I don't know what exactly was involved with that. I mean, the character is obviously Tati,
and there's a story about Tati that he had a child outside of wedlock quite early in his career, and never acknowledged them in his lifetime at all. And I think because The Illusionist is about like a kid who meets someone who's clearly supposed to be Tati, and there's a sort of implied relationship between them, is my understanding. I haven't actually seen it.
Yeah. I saw it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I really enjoyed it. I can't remember a heck of a lot about it. I remember the animation style and the character much more than I remember the narrative. But I remember really enjoying it, and it had a bit more of the kind of vaudevillian stuff of like him on stage doing these performance pieces. But yeah, I almost group that in with his work as well because it feels so much like him.
I mean, it's certainly kind of designed as like a homage to him, and
well, the character looks exactly like him. It's obvious, and I think he's even billed on the movie. Maybe it's a screenwriting credit or something like that. If it's based off of his screenplay, but yeah, it's obviously him that they're trying to.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for coming and talking. We are getting very close to time, so I should do the two things at the end, which are if people like the sound of this very strange comedy filmmaker from mostly the early 60s in France, aside from just go and watch Jacques Tati's movies, what would you recommend? I guess, and if you wanted to watch Jacques Tati's movies, how would you recommend getting into them?
I don't know. Is it people give me a hard time, whenever they say, DVDs, no one buys physical media and something. I think that's the only place you're going to get Jacques Tati right now.
I think so. I don't think they're on any streaming things. No. I think if you did manage to find some way of watching them, probably the one that I would recommend starting with would be Mon Oncle. Yeah. Because it's probably the one. It does kind of not really have a story, but it's the one which feels where that lack of a story feels most normal.
Right. Yeah, it's more of an idea. There's like there are these people who are stuck up, and there's this cool uncle or awkward, strange, fun uncle. And it feels a bit more like a modern set piece, Mr. Bean, in many ways. But I think that's a good transition movie because if you go like Mr. Hulot's Holiday, who came before that, it's a bit more kind of naturalistic world and stuff like that, and he's working in real environments and stuff like that rather than the set pieces. But I think either one of them would be a good start. Mr. Hulot's Holiday would be good.
Yeah, certainly one of the Hulot movies. I mean, if you wanted,
don't start with Parade.
No, don't start with Parade because it is just essentially a televised circus performance with some Jacques Tati bits in it. Don't start with Playtime because you will be convinced that it comes from outer space. You might.
The Illusionist. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm looking it up now, and he is credited as a screenwriter. But it's not a bad starting place. It's a very enjoyable movie, and the animation style is really nice.
Yeah, and if you were okay with it not being like the best one, but it being quite easy to watch and understand, you could watch Traffic. Because it's not the best one, but it's it's a lot like a movie. Like it does have a beginning and a middle and an end. They go on a big road trip and they successfully get to the end. And then he goes off into the sunset with the girl, which, I mean, one of the recurring things about Hulot is that he never gets the girl.
There's no relationship. Or not often. Is there a standard or typical relationship, rather?
Yeah. Well, there's often a girl that he's kind of like slightly mooning over, but she's like oblivious, or he just keeps walking into things and it never comes together. And in my review that I wrote for the website, I kind of possibly too poetically hinted that him, getting Hulot together with the girl at the end was his kind of like, this circle has been completed. Right. This guy can disappear now thing.
Mr. Bean is similar in that, though. He never really gets the girl. There's a girl there, and he just kind of dances around her, and she's the butt of jokes and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the only place you could probably find these, and I don't know, because we don't get Criterion Channel here in New Zealand. It's only in America, I think. But Mubi, do you know the Mubi streaming? Yep. They might have it inside the libraries.
And
there.
It would kind of come and go.
Well, they do have a library now that stays.
Oh, cool.
Of hundreds of movies. There's a lot of Truffaut. All of Chaplin's films are on there. And usually in 4K restorations. It's gorgeous. And Mubi is one of the cheaper streaming apps that most people don't know about. But yeah, recently they've announced a library of stuff that just lives there, and you can watch it at any time. I think the work of Kelly Reichardt is a really good modern director, and her new film First Cow. Have you heard of First Cow? It's exclusively on this streaming service. I was going to look and see if Tati's work's on there.
But yeah, I mean, certainly that would be the place where something like that would turn up if it turned up anywhere. Otherwise, look for places that have DVD collections still, and chance your arm.
Do you know where I got my DVDs from? From the Red Cross bookshop.
Oh, right.
Someone had dropped off 3 or 4 Tati movies.
Good
there.
grief.
And I was like, man, I just hit jackpot. So I bought them immediately. And I'd only seen one of the 4, and have since watched all of them. But Parade was in there. Because, I really don't know where you'd find these movies. None of them are on Mubi, apparently. Right. I'm looking right now. So I don't know. You have to be really...
campaign to find someone to show them.
I know where they're at.
Yep.
Canopy.
Right.
Canopy with a K. If you go to PNCC, Palmerston North City Council, pncc.canopy with a K, Kanopy, .nz, or maybe .com.
If you just search for Canopy with a K, you will find it, and you can sign into it with your library
With your library card, and they have at least 3 or 4 of them on there.
Oh, cool. Fantastic.
And you can watch them for free if you have your library card.
Cool. So, finally, plug your stuff. What have you got? You were saying, of course, that I don't know exactly when this episode's going to come out, because I don't think it's coming out the week we're recording it. But the next Cinematheque over in Pahiatua is From Russia with Love.
From Russia with Love, and it's going to play on the 26th. We're now moving to a Sunday night. So hopefully... We've had good numbers so far. We've been doing it on a Monday night, and a lot of the audience said Monday nights work really well. But the reason I've sort of pushed for Sunday is because I want to do the October show on Halloween, which is the 31st, which is on a Sunday. And so I said, why don't we just move them all to Sundays and see what that does? So we're trying Sunday for a little while right now.
Yep. And that might be more feasible as a kind of day trip out from Palmy as well, if people were thinking about doing that.
Yeah. So we're going to do From Russia with Love on the 26th. And hopefully, the cinema sits just over 100, with social distancing and stuff like that. We'll see what we can fit in there. Right now the rules are 50, but we'll see. Hopefully that opens up a bit more. I don't think Pahiatua is going to get any COVID cases anytime soon. Hopefully,
with any luck. And if people want to follow that and work out what the next movie is and things, then Facebook's the best way to do that.
Oh yeah, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We'll have all that. You just type in Tararua Cinematheque Cinema and then THEQUE. If you just type in Tararua Cinema, it'll come up. And we post stuff on there all the time. And I post a lot of movie history stuff. And
any idea what your spooky movie for?
I already know. I can tell you what show in the rest of the year, but I want to save it. I will tell you it's a double feature though.
Yeah. An old-fashioned double feature. Very
old-fashioned. Okay, I'm gonna. Should I let the cat out of the bag just a little bit? Okay, maybe. it's most likely going to be a James Whale double feature.
Right.
Director James Whale, which if you know movies very well, you'll know some of the things he did for Universal early in his career.
Right.
Which a really good movie about James Whale, where Ian McKellen plays him. It's called Gods and Monsters. I think it came out in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Ian McKellen and Brendan Fraser. And it's a wonderful movie about the actual man toward the end of his life. But yeah, we're most likely going to show a double feature with 2 of his movies. I'll definitely show one of them, but I'm doing a technical test. We might be showing a 3D film in 3D as well.
Ooh.
But I'm not going to tell you what that is.
Yeah,
I'll tell you it was not made. It was made in the middle of the 20th century.
Yep.
In polarized 3D.
That's
just like a
very
modern.
cool.
Yeah. I probably just, if anyone knows anything, they'll know what it is.
Well, you mean you spurred a bout of frantic Googling from everybody else. Well, look, thank you very much for coming and talking again, Derrick. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, man. Cheers.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes at npr.nz/show/reserved or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Objective Realty, or you can follow the show on Facebook. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.